In this session, we are going to learn about a special annotation that we could use to add on top of the bean definitions where we define our bean definitions with add component annotation, and we could define and specify whether a bean definition could be taken into account in some circumstances or not. So that annotation is named add conditional. So like the name of it, it means that on some condition, we want a bean definition to be added amongst our bean definitions or not. So if we want to use that, we have to annotate our classes where we have annotated with add component with add conditional. Add conditional. So this add conditional annotation actually asks for a compulsory attribute, and that attribute is an implementation of this interface, which is the condition. So we have to implement this interface and implement this single method here and return either true or false. We should return a Boolean indicating that whether this engine component should be taken into account and added among the other bean definitions or not. But because actually it is not actually used directly by implementing this one, there is this other annotation named add profile. Let me show you add profile, which itself is annotated with add conditional. So the add profile and so add conditional annotation, as you can see, is a meta annotation. So we could compose other annotations with it, like we did with qualifiers and component and other annotations. So there is this profile annotation. Again, this is the second annotation we are learning today inside the Spring, which is annotated with add conditional, and they have actually defined and created a class that has implemented the condition interface, and they have provided the logic for that. Now, I will go into details of this logic. So for profile, we only need to specify a string or a list of strings. So what is a profile? The idea behind the profile is that we define some string indicating that this bean definition, this specific bean definition, should be activated when we are running the application with this profile. Let's say, for example, we want a bunch of other bean definitions when we are running the applications in the test mode, in the integration test mode. Or let's say that we want some other bean definitions to be taken into account and others be ignored when we run the application, for example, in a environment with low resource, with low memory. So we could use it actually any way we like. So by annotating the components with add profile, let's say that it is the profile of, I don't know, let's say ABC. I don't know how to name it. So this is the profile ABC, and it doesn't have any profile. The super engine doesn't have any profile, but the engine has this profile. Now, if we run the application, you'll see that we will have only the super engine among the bean definitions. The engine is not taken into account, is not added among the other bean definition. And the reason is that it will be only used when the ABC profile is activated, and we have not activated it yet. And because it's not activated, then it is not taken into account. And because now the remaining one is a single bean definition, then it will resolve and it will inject the super engine to the car instance. So the question is that how we should activate a profile. So the way that we should do it, actually there are a bunch of ways, but here we could do actually like this. Before giving the packages to scan, first we access the environment. We will talk about this environment a lot actually in the future episodes. we here we could set the active profiles, set active profiles. So I'm going to set the ABC profile. We could set a bunch of other profiles, actually, any profile, for example, test, or any naming that we have on top of our components. And after that, we should say to scan these packages, and we should say refresh. So before giving this one to scan, first we set the active profiles, and then we specify the packages that it should scan. So now if we run it, it actually chose the engine. It found the engine actually among the other bean definitions beside the super engine. And the reason that it could resolve is that the injection point name is engine as well. That is, we talked about it in the other episodes, in the previous episodes. So as you can see, it is now adding the engine. The super engine will be added whatsoever, because there is no add profile here. When we add the add profile, it is a type of add conditional that actually specifies a condition for that bean definition and for that component. So this profile has nothing to do with this component. And also, activating a profile has nothing to do with the components that do not actually specify any active profiles, any profile actually. So how actually the way that profile condition works, the way that it works, this annotation works, is that it is an add conditional with this implementation inside the Spring. So this is a simple implementation. And as you can see, it first tries to get the value of the value inside the value attribute. This value that we have given here, we are passing this as value, and this is the attribute. So it is trying to first get that value, and then it is trying to ask the system, ask the environment about the activated profiles and see if this profile is amongst those profiles. So now, because we have activated the single profile, the ABC, it will activate all the components that are annotated with add profile. The other thing that I want to mention here is that we could specify a bunch of profiles, like with an array like this, any number of profiles, or we could use the operators to specify a profile. We could say ABC or test, or for example, and A or B, for example. This is actually this is not a valid because it forces us to use parentheses when we use the and or. Okay, this is actually, as you can see, it is a complicated logic here with and or, and we could use the not as well. So we could do anything with it. We could say if profile A or B or C, either of them, if one of them is activated, then take this into account. And the last thing that I want to talk about is the default profiles. So there are a bunch of active profiles, and there are a bunch of default profiles. So what are the default profiles? The default profiles is the profiles that will be used when there are no active profiles set on the system. So when we set at least a single active profile, then the default profiles won't be used. But if we don't set any active profile, it will actually, so as you can see, we have set default profiles. We could set a bunch of default profiles. And there is already a default profile set for us with the string literal default. So when we don't, as I said, when we don't specify any active profile, when we don't activate any profile, this means that those that are annotated with @profile won't be taken into account. But those that are annotated with @profile and with the value of one of those default profiles, and now because it's the default, actually they will be chosen. So they will be selected. Let me put it here as well to prove that we will have both of them, both the engine and super engine. And we have actually this profile with default and also this one. Let's get rid of this one here because it doesn't make sense. So, okay, so this one doesn't have any profile. So because it doesn't have, it will be taken into account with no condition. This one has a profile. It means that this value should be activated on the system before it searches for the bean definition. But because its name is one of the names of the default profiles, and I know it is actually going to sound a little bit complicated here. Because of that, it is, and because also there is no profile activated, then it is taking the super engine also into account. But if we activate at least a single profile, then that super engine, then the super engine is not defined, actually, is not searched, is not scanned. Because this default value is one of the, although it is the value inside the default profiles, but because at least one profile is activated, then it is ignored. So I can show that logic here as well. As you can see, it gets all the values, it passes to this, and it returns true only if it accepts one of its profiles. So this accept, I'm going inside the logic and code of the Spring, is using this function here. So this function inside the Spring first gathers all the active profiles. And then it will return true either if this given profile is inside the active profiles, or there are no active profile and the given profile is inside the default profiles. So yeah, the way that we actually set it and put it. So that is actually using the profiles, and it is used sometimes, but not that much. And you can use it, you can use the @conditional annotation for custom logics. For example, you could create a logic and see if more than one bean definition is, for example, defined with this type, then ignore this one. Yeah, so this was the conditional and the @profile.